after enough years of looking at the CSGO stats particularly, there's definitely some kind, it's probably not a super strong one, but it's at least like a medium correlation between things like how much can you frag, what are your differentials, etc. Obviously, these are all based on role and there's like a lot of specific aspects, but if we're talking more generally, there clearly is some sort of like at least a medium strength correlation between those and, for example, how important are you to your team or how like good a player you are overall. Because basically, like the simple way to say it is this. It's like I once heard a comment like this said about Ronaldo, like the Portuguese one in soccer, right? Where people who don't like Ronaldo, believe it or not, right, used to say this. They would say all he does is score goals. And someone pointed out, like, yeah, but that is like 90% of winning football matches, though, isn't it? Like, because obviously football's an extreme example where, you know, you can have possession for 90% of the game, but if they score the 2 goals and you score the 1, your possession counts for fuck all. Whereas, like, in a sport like basketball, if I had possession 90% of the game, like, I don't think it's even possible for you to score more points than me, probably. Yeah. It's like, it's probably insanely difficult if it's ever even happened. So, like, in that scenario, right, I kind of do think there is something like that in Counter-Strike. It's one of the reasons why, if you notice, I'm one of the areas I try to do actually quite diligent work is in trying to explore who are the players who are overrated and underrated. Because if you notice, they tend to be the same players. It's just how you set the discussion up. So I'll give you 2 examples, right? People either think that RPK is the most underrated player or the most overrated, because if you only care about numbers, he never has that very good in terms of fragging. So if you think frags matter, that's kind of the point I was making about the Ronaldo one, in the same sense as goals matter incredibly massively in soccer, even though there are a million other slight details that are important in soccer. In the same way in CS, you can do as many beautiful things. I mean, you know, this is an IGL. You can do as many great things as you want on a T side. If you don't win the round, it means fuck off you got the bomb. That means fuck off you got the 2 entry. You know, like at the end of the day, some of those things don't have the value that they might in the minutiae, you know. Like at the end of the day, sadly, the star player who wins the 1v1 might be the most important player at the end of that round. Doesn't matter what had to happen. So, like, I noticed with certain players, RPK, Zipnix is a classic one, because I personally think that, like, I get why people thought he was underrated before, because if you only looked at stats, you don't see what he does. I think we went the other way. Now he became the most overrated player. Now he's like all those fuckers in the NBA who are like 6th man of the year, and then people are like, they should put him in the starting lineup. It's like, dude, you're not understanding the premise of what he does. Like, the whole reason he's getting those
backups.
Yeah, Lou Williams isn't going to get those numbers if he started in the NBA, you idiot. He gets those in like he gets that when the other stars go out of the game and he just feeds on the shitters, doesn't he? Like, so anyway, yeah. you get where I'm going with this as a principle. Like, there is some sort of a correlation, clearly. Like, for example, I know Astralis is a great example generally for this, mate, because there's a million angles, but the other one is this. Everyone used to try and say during the peak of Astralis that I should stop saying Device is the best player because, you know, they all have such unique qualities, and, you know, a lot of them had, like, some of them would have like different matches where they would top frag, and I was like, yeah, but at the end of the day, the guy who gets the most frags is still Device. He has to do it the most consistently, and that's why he's getting all the MVPs and why we're going to call him the best player. Like, where do you come down on that? Because basically what I'm kind of leaning into there as well is how much the CS is fragging.
So, I mean, I think fragging is like, if you only had to get one variable to try to guesstimate how good somebody is, I think that's the one that you would use. There's no question about it. I think the interesting thing that you kind of alluded to but didn't necessarily really touch on is the thing that's really hard to figure out, and I think is probably potentially the most valuable thing if you could kind of learn to approximate that or, you know, estimate it better, is who's actually capable of having a bigger role or being better than how they're currently being used. So, for example, like, you know, going back to what I was with, you know, the Daryl Morey thing that I said earlier, you know, like James Harden, a bunch of people thought he was the 6th guy. A bunch of people thought he was going to be another Lou Williams coming in, scoring 20, 25 points off the bench. And now he's one of the best defensive players ever. And, you know, like, you don't have to like how he plays basketball. Yeah, you don't have to like how he plays basketball, but like, he's every night when I look at the box score, I turn the TV on that channel. He's at 35 points with 15 shots. Yeah. Like, that's just what he does. So, like, you know, that's like a good example. I think there's some others who, you know, like you picked out players like Zaibu. He's one of the guys who got picked out of, you know, it's like an FPL player and like AAA, like a bad French team, looked amazing against bad teams. But there's a lot of players who looked amazing against bad teams and just like never amounted to anything. You know, they got picked up by good teams and then they just looked average. That's the part that I think is just like, it's just hard to tell, because there's a lot of, you know, for every Zaibu or every Coldzera who comes out of nowhere and is instantly incredibly good, you know, there's 30 other guys who get picked up and they just can never make it work.
Because the reason why I bring that one up is if you're going to talk about those top 20 lists, and I agree with you, by the way, especially, I mean, there's a cheat built into this, which is in the modern day, all the analysts look at the fucking stats after every game anyway. So unfortunately, like at the end of the year, it doesn't matter if we went roughly based on the top stats. Like they would already be picking, they sort of preloaded to base it off the stats. But ignoring that, I agree generally. Like if I sat someone like Maniac down and I didn't let him look at all the stats now, but I just said, listen, you've got 10 minutes, just write down 20 names and they have to roughly be the 20 best of the year. Now, the point is, yeah, if he had the stats in front of him in a whole like 5-hour session, I'm sure there's a couple when it gets down to like 19 and 20 as the numbers where he'd think about it for 20 minutes and he'd go back and forth and he might change his mind. But I agree. I'm going to guess off the bat, like 15 of them immediately, first of all, he'd easily get. And then secondly, would probably overlap with whatever I would pick, even if I haven't talked to him and I have no idea where he's at on the matter. But actually, that's why I bring up the example of the RPKs. The Zipnix one's probably the best one. Because, dude, where do you come down on that? Because I actually think in a world without stats, someone like Zipnix would get way more plaudits to me. I think he would automatically get like top 20 status because you know how even analysts think about that guy. They always use this logic of like, but without him, Stars would have lost the game. Whereas I did a whole text piece on this. I'll link it in the description. My article was this, right? I pointed out, yes, he's a brilliant player, a mate, blah, blah, blah. I give all the praise you need, but I also pointed out, are we just going to pretend this is a one-way relationship? Like, he benefits in every single sense from every teammate he has. What doesn't he benefit from having Zonic and Glaive and fucking Device? And, like, mate, give me a break. Like, people were acting like, only his part counts and then everything that sets him up to that point. So where do you come down on players like that where it's like, first of all, they clearly do have more value than the raw number can show. But my point, which is kind of what I'm adding in there, is my problem with Zipnix is this. He's in a situation where basically everything he does amazingly, it's like Dennis Rodman in those Bulls. You only get to see the upside because they cover all his weaknesses. You never have to see him show weakness. My problem is this. Take a few players off his team and even replace them with statistically identical players, but they just aren't those same teammates. And I imagine he couldn't do certain things more. Like I don't think he could do what Device does or some massive fragger. So when you come down on a player like that where it's like you obviously want to give him the credit, but can a player like that, even if the numbers aren't crazy, be like a top 20 player for you? Where do you come down on that?
I just think it's hard, to be honest, because I think to be one of the top 20 players, I think you have to be like the second best player on like a championship team. Like you have to, I think. Like if you can't be the second best player, or unless you just have like a phase 2017, was it the year that I think 2017? Unless you have a team like that, like if you just got to be one of the top two guys on a really good team, I think. If you're not even necessarily the third best player there, I just don't think it's possible. I think that at that point, like that's either you have the all-time greatest team, which, by the way, in that case, like they actually do, but I still don't think it's relevant. But like I just don't think that's reasonable. I think we've had this specific conversation once with Semler. I remember outside of a hotel in Stockholm when we were talking about I think the way we framed the discussion was, let's say we break apart every Counter-Strike team in the world and we're basically drafting players to field new teams. And I don't remember whether the context was, like you get them in this age or for one game or, just like for the rest of their careers or whatever. But like we started talking about that. And I remember the way Semler framed his answer was something along the lines of like, well, like I'm going to get Zipix and then I'll just have the best support
player.
He
meant first. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Number one in the draft.
Okay, but like by the time you're picking your best player, like Simple and, now I guess Saibu, Device, Coldzera, all these guys, Nico, they're going to be off the board. Yeah, you have the best support players, but you have none of the stars. Like, how are you going to win? Like you don't see a lot of these teams without the superstars also. Like the superstars are prerequisites, and then you can have these nice little luxuries on the side. So I just think, I think he might be, Zipix is a very good player. I don't think he's one of the top 20 players in the world. I think, and I don't think that's like, that's not meant as like, oh, he's not a good player. Like being one of the top 20 players is really hard. Sure. But like, I just don't think that he could have a large enough role in a separate team, in a different team, to really, really warrant that status. And like, it's a team game, sure, but like I just think there's many more players who could potentially have a much larger role and a much more important role. And I agree, like, he does benefit from having a very visible role in the way some of the rounds are won. And like at the same time, I think, whoever has crafted a narrative, like, I think it benefits greatly from the fact that he is kind of expected to not put up numbers. He's just expected to win those clutches. So, while, you have players who are not fan favorites in the same sense, like they have the same, weak stat line sometimes, they're 8 and 10 at the end of the half, people be like, okay, well, like he just screwed this up for his team. If you look at Zipex, you remember that one round because he gets every single clutch because of the way he plays. You remember that one round? Well, he won that round for them. He's done what he's needed to. And I guess like Device and Dupree just needed to get more kills.
I mean, I'll use another example of an Astralis player, actually, because obviously, like, it's best to use the players people have seen play so they know roughly what we're talking about. One of the things I noticed was a difference between me and a lot of other people is when 2018 happened, the year when Astralis won all that shit, basically. At the end of the year, I noticed most people actually agreed with, I think HLTV had the same opinion. They had the second best Astralis player after Device as Magisk, because I think stats-wise, he had like a slightly higher rating or something. But I actually had Dupree. And so basically, what I'm going to lead into now is this is also another aspect that like the eye test actually is at the moment without some sort of super advanced metrics, which you could do in CS, by the way, because actually a side tangent, what makes CS different from real life is we control the universe in CS. Like we can actually literally tell like where something is in a vector. Like we can only gauge these things in real life. We have to use like lasers and shit in real life to guess those things. So actually in CS, in theory, we could track things like we could use like heat map concepts to check like space creation. Again, more things that are obvious things that we should have, but we don't, basically. But we don't have that, right? So instead what we do is we just use those terms loosely and we use the eye test to tell us who creates space, who occupies that space, who benefits from that. So to me, basically what I'm leading to is the reason I actually had Dupree as a better player than Magisk is because when I looked at how amazing those T-sides were of Astralis, and then I saw that, guess what, my old boy Dupree sometimes was on hard entry duty like the old days. I was like, mate, some of the I have this concept I use now for players like this, where I say, like, some of his kills go on someone else's part of the scoreboard. So, like, I know at the end of the game, the number for the guy behind him is way higher, but, like, it's the argument we always made against Forest back in the day. It's like, mate, you were in the dream position to get the most kills. Not everyone else who was competing with you was in those positions. So, like, how do you come down on stuff like that? Because obviously the angle there is, even that concept like space creation, it's already a very vague way of describing it. There's nothing specific about it, right? But where everyone knows sort of what it means. So do you believe in, like, are there things that are more valuable than current stats that we have that we just can't quantify right now?
Yeah, and I mean, I actually think you actually can even quantify that very specifically because you could look at their entry usage rate, basically, is I think how I previously described it. So like the number of entry duels they take as percentage of total. So, my guess is that Dupree is in the 25-30% range for Astralis, just because those Device and Magisk are so passive, at least like if you adjust Device for like the op duels that really are not like entry duels the same way because you're just holding angles aggressively, etc. So I like that's just a much harder role, I think, particularly to be consistent on, and it's a more pressure role, I think, in many ways. So I think there's definitely there's like you definitely should ascribe different levels of value and also difficulty to different roles on the team, I think, for sure. You can kind of approximate many of these things, I think, from stats today, but there's nothing that kind of tries to separate them. Like you look at the stats lines of Simple, Zaibu, and Device, and they might look very similar statistically, but like the way those are put together and like the kills that go into those numbers are very different.
In fact, actually, I'll give you one that was on the top of my head, because something I know I messaged you about recently, which is when people have been having this whole ZWoo versus Simple debate, right? Which is a totally legit debate, by the way. Like, I'm not one of these idiots who thinks that you have to think your guy is definitely the best and the other guy sucks, I actually hate those debates where people take 1A, 1B discussions and they make it like one guy's 4 times better than the other one. Like, I'll give you an example. At the time of recording this video, no one technically knows whether Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers will win the MVP this season. Right? I'll just tell you right now, as a massive Aaron Rodgers fan, I'll be totally fine if Patrick Mahomes wins it. Like, it's not that big a difference that we have to go crazy. Now, I would say that would actually be an interesting discussion where we could have had this same topic, but on NFL. Like, I would obviously argue things like Aaron Rodgers has way less fucking weapons, etc. And it's worse coaching stuff. Like, there's a million angles I would take that are like
so only been in one team with a winning record this year, though. That's a stat for you. It's real.
Blame the NFL for not scheduling anyone to play them then. They've won 12 out of 15 games. It's pretty good. Still pretty good. No, I get the premise though, sure. No, but here's where I would come down on this, right, is So when people are doing those differences, here's an example of something stats can't tell you. It can, obviously, but the current ones we have, just to make it colloquial, can't tell you. Right? I was pointing out to you, the thing I think, actually, I'm going to do a whole video separately on that, is unreal about Simple. It's just, because think about it, right? Everyone's played Counter-Strike so long that when you're looking for little edges to improve in, normally it's just stuff that even like a noob's working on, like I'll work on my grenades or, I'll watch my positions. Simple, it's like he got so bored being the best. He's now trying to like change what being a Counter-Strike player is, because the amount of games you see now where he is just, in the past, right, when he had Zeus on his team, he used to quite famously sometimes swap to play B on Mirage, CT, B, instead of Zeus, just so you couldn't exploit Zeus, because that was like a classic position where it's one of the most exploitable if you have a bad player there, right? It's classic that you do. In fact, famously, you even put your bad player there because almost no one can hold those positions properly, like to make it worthwhile. Like, you're better off having your good player, connector or fucking ticket booth or something like those are the real spots. Yeah, of course. So basically, Simple famously used to sometimes swap out then, but people at the time thought he's just doing that because he's Simple and he's Zeus. Like, the disparity is so insane, it's worth even a gamble. Essentially, on a bunch of maps, Simple just does that whenever he wants now on CT side. Like, he effectively just decides in a way that, if you think about it, it's actually genius if you could do it. Like, I'll just pick that spot they're probably going to come to now. I'll go there, and since I'm the best player in the world, I'll just kill them all. Like, in some ways, he's actually like, the reason it's kind of genius is because, like, first of all, almost no one else could do it, so it's not like anyone else is sitting down and choosing whether they do this. But if you could do it, it actually does, like, make up for, like, essentially you pick up the slack for a bunch of teammates that couldn't hold that spot in that situation. But what I'm getting to is, at the end of the game, the scoreboard's just going to tell me how many kills and deaths he got, the same as Ziwu. Even if Ziwu's in the same spot 15 rounds on CT side. So, like, there's an example to me already where it's not that, like, stats can't tell us it. Like I said, again, we could easily track those things. It's just that the moment we don't even attempt to look for that, do we? We just kind of just look at the final number.